Hey everyone. So we're going to continue some of our discussions from earlier lessons on how to create an environment for your children that decreases the number of times that they act out and decreases their episodes of dysregulation, right? So the reason I'm bringing this up is a huge challenge, a huge area of challenge that I hear from parents and caregivers, and what I faced myself as a parent, involves the time when our children are already dysregulated, right? So when they're in that state of being, we're no longer looking for proactive solutions to avoid the meltdown. We're right in the deep, in the heart of behavior management of that current episode, right? And we're thinking this has to stop right now. For children who are healthy, it's reasonable to expect that they can calm themselves down on their own. But for our kids who have come from abuse and neglect backgrounds, and for our kids whose regulatory systems are underdeveloped for any number of reasons, asking them or expecting them to calm down on their own is actually asking them for something that their little bodies are just not capable of doing. So, I want to share this biological truth with you. And when I first heard it hit me hard. And that's that in the moment of your child melting down or having a fit, he or she isn't capable of processing information in the brain. In those moments, physiologically, it's like they're in a quicksand of their body's survival functioning processes, and their rational mind goes offline. The way I look at it is like this. It's like there's this battle that's going on unseen. There's so many higher order physical processes that go on internally to take one's body from dysregulation to calm. And we don't see any of it because it's happening inside the body. Now, especially for our children who have come from early adverse experiences, their systems of restoring balance and calm, those systems are in direct competition with another body system. And this other body system is much more developed in them. And it's so highly sensitive that it takes over even the body's natural desire to be calm and regulated. Our children that have come from these harder places have overreactive and more developed survival systems. We've talked about this in some of our earlier lessons, those the fight, flight, and freeze, right? And we've talked about how that kicks in for them in times when it doesn't really need to. And we've also talked about how a child who lives in their fear brain, they have a body that registers survival mode when there's no threat. These are the things that create the physical chaos that we see manifest as fits and temper tantrums and screaming and hitting. And again, that hard truth is that anything that we say to them in those moments, that's not going to carry the weight and meaning that we need it to, so that they can calm down on their own. The other hard thing when I first learned it is that it's not a behavior, it's not a moral issue, right? It's not a matter of that they refuse to listen to us when we say calm down, but they can't. They're drowning in their dysregulation, and their bodies are incapable of rescuing themselves. Okay? Their bodies are incapable of rescuing themselves. Now, that sounds like a God thing right there, right? That's a God moment that we have right there. We know about being incapable of rescuing ourselves, right? We know that in a spiritual sense, we needed an outside force to take us from that chaos of lostness to the calm and the peace of reconciliation with God our Father. We could not and cannot save ourselves. So I want you to think about your children's dysregulation, their physical dysregulation. I want you to see it as a mirror of the kind of chaos that you can remember yourself experience before God rescued you. And I think when you see it this way, it will help change how you look at your dysregulated child. And I think this is how our own eyes and hearts of compassion can get re-kicked back into gear. Sometimes we need that too. When we see parallels between our child's physical dysregulation and our own spiritual needs that have been met through Messiah. We need to remember that we needed rescuing from spiritual dysregulation. It wasn't something we were capable of doing for ourselves. We needed a calm, confident, compassionate God to step outside of time and eternity, to come down to our level and take us out of that chaos. And I think that we, being image bearers of God to the world, we can certainly model this for our children in their physical dysregulation. We can model for them there what God did for us spiritually. And yes, you can be the calm, confident, compassionate force for your children. You can always learn tips and techniques and strategies to be there for your children, to help them to co-regulate out of their physical and emotional storms. And I'm going to give you an activity here in just a little bit. But I think that that's the easy part, because that's just a matter of gaining knowledge and gaining skills. But I think that the real healing comes when we co-labor with God to change the way that we look at our children's struggles. We can even see our children's maladaptive behaviors, those big explosive behaviors, as an opportunity to model for them that love and that rescue that God has done for us. I think we're in a position to really make a difference there. We can transform our own minds to see our children in a different way, to see them even in their big behaviors through God's compassion, with His calmness. And we can have confidence that He will help us heal our children when we co-labor with Him. And I think that's when we all win, and I think that's when we're all healed. So let's get a little bit to the practical, right? Let's talk about how we can create a more understanding and nurturing environment for our kids. And I think we can do that by helping them understand the science, the brain science behind their meltdowns. Okay. Now, here in just a little bit, I'm going to share an activity with you that you can do with your children so that they can better understand what kind of is going on in their brains when they get overwrought with emotions. I'm going to teach you a hand model of the brain and what happens to all of us when we get really upset and flip our lids. Okay. Now, if you're taking notes, either in your head or you're taking notes on paper or something, you can file all this information under the heading of how can you reduce shame in your child by teaching about the brain. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to reduce shame in your child by teaching about the brain. Let me tell you about a little boy that I worked with. He would get dysregulated over something that would trigger him. And he would hit and he would scream and he would fight and he would say horrible things to his adopted mother. Now, the tricky thing here was that when he would eventually calm down a little bit, then he would ramp it up again for no apparent reason, and certainly not for the original reason, whatever that original trigger was. Well, do you know what was happening? The new meltdown was because of shame that he felt for having done whatever it was that he had just done. The hitting, the kicking, the screaming, the saying the bad things. He'd feel so much shame when he would calm down again. And then because of that shame, the meltdown would start all over again. Right? Now, at the time, to his family, it looked like one big, long, continuous meltdown. And it wasn't until his mother and I processed this together that she realized that kind of what was going on behind the scenes. He would get so filled with shame at himself for getting out of control, and that fueled a new meltdown. So we got to talking about how can we reduce his shame load, right? I think one thing that we have to always keep in the forefront of our minds is that our children have a story that started long before we met them. Your child's history affects their body, their brain, their beliefs, their behaviors, and their biology. Now, one way that their history affects their beliefs is how they feel about themselves as a person. So all infants deserve to be seen and heard and valued by their parents, by their caregivers. But sometimes their basic needs go unmet in infancy and early childhood, and that affects how they see themselves as people. Most of the time, our children who are foster children or adopted children that have come from these really hard beginnings, they come to us with a really well-developed shame core because they've already heard messages given to them before we ever met them, and these messages were negative. Some of our kids are swimming in shame, and their drowning looks like bad behaviors and meltdowns. Now, it's been said that abuse sends a message. The message is, I hate you. And neglect sends the message, you don't exist. What's happening is that our kids aren't able to separate their experiences in the past from who they are as a person. They're not separating out their history and their behaviors from their own self-identity and worth. So they need us to support them to do that. It is possible for you to help your child break free from the shame of their histories and the shame of their past and their current challenges. But how? Well, what I propose and what I have done with families I have worked with is that we can teach our children a little bit about their brains, and in doing so, this takes some of that stigma and shame out of the past meltdowns. Because children will think when they're calm after they've had a meltdown, most of the time they're going to think that they're a bad kid because of that. So what we want to do is we want to teach our kids about the brain in some really simple terms so that they understand what happens behind the scenes in their brains during the meltdown. It's not because they're bad kids. So let's talk about the hand model of the brain. Okay, so I have a little handy model of the brain, and it looks like this. Okay, so and I encourage you to do this as you see me do this. Okay, so you're going to make a fist with your thumb tucked inside your fingers. Okay, this is the model of the brain. So it kind of looks like a brain. Okay, now I'm going to label these parts using language, grown-up language, right? And then later we'll go through and I'll give you like a little example script of how you can talk to your children about this. You're not going to refer to this part as the amygdala with your children, okay? Your younger children. So the thumb, the thumb is the midbrain, the stem, and the limbic system. It's the emotional brain. This is where your memories and your emotions are processed. And the amygdala here is that fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, that's where that's triggered. Your fingers are the cerebral cortex, which is your rational brain. This houses our ability to think and reason. Fingernails, and I probably should have gotten mine done. Fingernails are that prefrontal cortex, okay, the problem-solving part of our brain. Now, when something triggers us, we are prone to flip our lid, which means that the prefrontal cortex, the fingernails, have a very poor connection with the midbrain, the thumb, and we're not able to access can't say that word, the logical thinking, problem-solving part of our brain, because our emotions are overriding our ability to think clearly. So when I talk about flipping your lid, this is it. Okay, and these are processes that we don't think about. This doesn't have anything to do with our morality or our goodness as a person. Okay, this model comes from Dr. Dan Siegel, and I will give you guys a link to some of his information. He has a little video, and he goes through and talks about all the different parts of the brain that I recommend you guys watch. He says that children as young as 5 can learn this model to understand what's happening in the brain when somebody flips their lid. Now, when the lid is flipped, there's not much we can do for our children until excuse me, until they come back into regulation. This is not the time to reason with them because they no longer have the cognitive ability to respond in that way. It's not touching anymore, right? They don't have access to the thinking parts of their brain. Now, as you know, children grow up and they become adults, right? So this also explains us when we get dysregulated. Now, I want you to teach this hand model to your child, but you knowing it will help you, I think, be more aware to look for those subtle signs of pre-dysregulation. And then when you catch it in time, there's some things that you can do to encourage and empower them to get back to regulation before they lose it. And we'll talk about how to do that in another lesson. But when our children understand that their brains actually go offline, they're actually going to experience less shame when they blow it and flip their lid. When I have worked with families and the children have learned this, they end up being able to talk to their parents in ways that they haven't been able to before. Because when a child is at that point of dysregulation, a lot of times their verbal abilities go offline. And they can't say to you, you know, I'm feeling really vulnerable right now, but they can do this. And there have been children who have been able to alert their parents that they're about to have a really, really hard time. And there's something about a parent who sees their child giving this sign that I need some help right now, even if, and then the full-blown explosion, that helps the parent to know that this isn't a moral issue. This is a little brain that needs help getting regulated. I have a little tickle in my throat today. Apologies. Now, I do want to say one thing. You know, a child who is dysregulated and they break something, let's say, you know, there's going to be consequences in the aftermath of a meltdown. Certainly natural consequences. If a child goes to the room, destroys the room, there's natural consequences, right? And there's going to be times when they're going to need to make restitution for whatever it is that they've done. But if we can get our children to understand that they're not bad people when a meltdown happens, that it's their thinking brain that goes offline, then we really can empower them not to recycle into a further meltdown because of the shame and the confusion that they might feel about what just happened. Now let me say this, shame is not the same thing as guilt. Shame is not a motivator toward better thinking and better acting. Shame is what gets people stuck and dysregulated. Guilt is different. Guilt says, I did wrong. I can improve. Shame says, I am wrong. I'm a lost cause. So we want to eliminate shame. Now, learn to teach this to your child. Okay, with your older children and your teens, they can just go straight to Dr. Dan Siegel's video, or you can just teach it straight the way I did with you. But you always want to pick a time to discuss this with your child when you're both calm. Okay, not right after a meltdown. With younger children, I love to use toys or puppets. I've got some little finger puppets that I use when I work with families, and I usually stick them on my, have the child pick out whatever kind of little animal that they want, and have it stick it on the thumb, and so that's their little, the amygdala, the fight, flight, and freeze. Some people call that the lizard brain or the animal brain, so I have a little animal puppet on there. It's kind of cute. That's hidden. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that your child does not feel like that they're in trouble for anything, because you're going to be talking about meltdowns, right? So you don't want them to feel like that they've done something bad, and that's very, very important, because if they feel that way, they're not going to be able to process what you're saying, right? So you can use language similar to this. This is for like the younger children. You can say, you know how sometimes you have a hard day and you get upset about things and you don't really know why? Well, that can feel really scary, right? If you don't know why. Did you know that it is because of something in your brain that you're not even aware of? And then usually the child's like, what, really? Then you ask them, do you want to see your brain? I can show you what it looks like. Well, most kids at this point are going to be all ears. They're like, I want to see my brain. So then that's when you pull out your hand. And then you get them to do it too. Okay, so you can explain it this way in terms of an upstairs brain and a downstairs brain. So you can tell them the upstairs brain is where you make the best decisions and you do the best things, even when you're feeling upset. Some people call this the big brain, or the thinking brain, the upstairs brain, the wise leader. Now, I would suggest for you just choose one, and that would be how you would present it. And then you invite them to open up their brain a little bit and take a peek inside. So you lift your fingers a little bit and show them to lift their fingers a little bit. And then you invite them to see where your thumb is. And you can call that the downstairs brain, little brain, animal brain, feeling brain, lizard brain, however you want to call it. And you tell them, excuse me, you tell them that this is where their really big feelings come from. It lets you feel really upset, like when you're mad or sad or scared or frustrated. And then you want to let them know that there's nothing wrong with feeling upset. That's normal. And it's okay, especially when your upstairs brain helps to calm you down. And you close your fingers again. And then invite them to notice something. What do you notice about your upstairs brain and your downstairs brain? Well, the thinking brain and the feeling brain are touching. When the two are touching, your thinking brain can help your feeling brain express your emotions calmly. Now, it's at this point that you would want to help them to understand that, um, like we're not trying to get them not to feel, right? We're not trying to get them to deny their emotions. We're trying to get them to understand that there will be a time when they can express their emotions, but do it in a calm way, okay? And then you can tell them that sometimes when we get really upset, we can flip our lids. And then you invite them to notice that the upstairs brain, the thinking brain, is no longer touching the emotions brain. And that means it can't help it stay calm. And this, you then tell them, this is what happens when you have a meltdown. And then you tell them that what you need to do, the two of you together, is find a way to get your thinking brain working together with your feelings brain. And it's always good at this point to tell them that this happened. This is everybody's brain. This happens to them. It happens to their siblings. It happens to grandma and grandpa. It happens to mom and dad, right? So the idea with this is to teach your child about what goes on behind the scenes of a meltdown, so that they will know that you don't think that they're bad kids when they flip their lid. And by the way, neither are you a bad grown-up kid when you flip your lid. One final thing before we end for today is I want to encourage you that this is a great thing to talk to your husband or your significant other or whoever you have in your life. Let them know the signal. Because even us grown-ups, there's times when we get really, really upset about something, and maybe for whatever reason, it's difficult for us to express what's really going on, and we can give this signal that, hey, I need some time. My husband and I taught this to him, and there have been some social situations that we've been in where I have been overwhelmed for one reason or another, and I'm not doing so well. And so I just give him a little like this, and then he knows, okay, it's time to rescue her out of this situation. But what that has done for us is it's taken the shame for me when I get myself in a little situation that's hard for me. It's helped me to remember that I'm not a bad person when I get overwhelmed by sensory input, right? Our children will know that they're not bad kids when they get overwhelmed with something and they're not able to regulate themselves, you know? So yeah, I feel like that this little hand model is a really excellent way to teach your children that they are still fearfully and wonderfully made, and this is the mechanism behind the scenes when they have meltdowns. It's not because they're a bad person, it's just the mechanism that happens in their life. So when you I'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments after you watch this video, and when you do teach this to your children, I would love you can send me pictures, you can let me know how it goes, because you know, like I've said before, this when I've done this with other families, it's really revolutionized the child in how they learn to feel better about themselves and some of the challenges that they have. So, okay, that's it for today, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye-bye.